"Oh, my dears. Please come sit with me for a while. I want to tell you a story. It's my story. It's a difficult one to tell, but I feel it's time. It's about love and loss and what happens when the person you trust most in the world breaks that trust in the most unimaginable way. It begins in a place I never thought I'd find myself alone. A hospital room. The silence in a hospital room has a sound all its own. It's not a peaceful silence. It's a hum, a low thrum of machinery that's supposed to be keeping you alive, but it feels like it's just counting down the minutes. I'd been in that room for 3 days. The sheets were starched and smelled of bleach, and the window looked out onto a brick wall. My world had shrunk to those 4 pale green walls, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, and the ache in my chest that had nothing to do with my illness. My husband, Richard, had brought me in. He'd held my hand in the emergency room, his own hands trembling slightly. "It's just for a few tests, Gracie," he'd said, his voice the same steady baritone that had calmed my fears for 52 years. "I'll be right here. I'm not going anywhere." And for the first day he was. He sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chair, reading his newspaper, occasionally looking up to give me a small, reassuring smile. He brought me a cup of weak tea from the canteen and complained about the price, just like he always did. It was normal. It was us. But on the second day his visits grew shorter. He had to check on the house, he said. Then he had an appointment he'd forgotten about. The excuses were plausible, just flimsy enough to let a little sliver of doubt creep in. I pushed it away. This was Richard. My Richard. The man who had held my hand through childbirth, who had cried with me when we buried my mother, who knew exactly how I liked my toast. He would not leave me. On the 3rd day he didn't come at all. I called his phone in the morning. It went straight to the answering machine. I tried again at lunch. The same. By evening, a cold, heavy dread had settled in my stomach. It was a feeling I hadn't known since I was a little girl, lost in a department store, realizing my mother's hand was no longer in mine. It was the chilling, primal fear of abandonment. The nurses were kind, but their eyes were filled with a pity I didn't want to understand. "He's probably just tied up, dear," one of them said, fluffing my pillow with a little too much vigor. "He'll be here tomorrow." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I wanted to believe her. I clung to that belief as the night nurse came in to check my vitals, as the hum of the machines lulled me into a fitful, dreamless sleep. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. There had to be. My life, our life, was built on the certainty of his presence. Without it, the entire structure would collapse. I just never imagined what I would see the next day, a sight that would bring it all crashing down in a single, silent, devastating moment. To understand the depth of that fall, you have to understand the height from which I fell. Our life wasn't a grand, sweeping epic. It was a quiet story written in the margins of everyday life. We met at a local dance when I was 20. He was tall and a little clumsy, and he spilled punch on my dress. He was so mortified, his face turned the color of a ripe tomato. I just laughed. That was the beginning. We married a year later. Our first home was a tiny apartment with a leaky faucet and neighbors who played their music too loud. But it was ours. It was where we brought our 2 children, a boy and a girl, home from the hospital. Richard was a wonderful father. He had a patience with them that I sometimes lacked. I remember watching him from the kitchen window as he taught our son, Michael, how to ride a bike, running alongside him, his hands steady on the back of the seat, long after Michael had found his balance. We built a life together, brick by brick. We bought a small house with a garden. I planted roses. He mowed the lawn every Saturday morning without fail. Our weekends were filled with the comfortable rhythm of routine. Grocery shopping, Sunday dinners, evenings spent in front of the television, my feet resting in his lap. He wasn't a man of grand romantic gestures. He never brought me dozens of roses or whisked me away on surprise trips. His love was in the small things. It was in the way he always made me a cup of tea before bed, the way he'd warm up my side of the bed in the winter before I got in, the way he'd hold my hand when we crossed the street, even after 50 years. Our children grew up and started families of their own. The house grew quiet again, but it was a comfortable quiet. We had our history etched into the walls, in the worn spot on the carpet where he always sat, in the collection of mismatched mugs in the cupboard. We had our shared memories, a language that only we understood. He was my anchor, my constant. I truly believed he was the one person in the world who would never, ever let me down. My trust in him was as natural as breathing. I thought I knew him, every part of him. I thought he would be there to hold my hand until the very end. That was the promise we had made standing in that little church all those years ago. It was a promise I had never questioned. It was the foundation of my world. The illness started subtly. A weariness I couldn't shake. A shortness of breath when I climbed the stairs. I dismissed it as old age, the natural winding down of a long-used clock. But Richard insisted I see a doctor. "I don't like the sound of that cough, Gracie," he'd said, his brow furrowed with worry. It was that worry, that care, that made what happened next so impossible to comprehend. The doctors found a problem with my heart. It wasn't dire, they said, but it needed monitoring. They wanted to admit me for a few days of observation and test. I was scared, of course. The word hospital has a way of striking fear into you at my age. But Richard was there. He packed my bag, making sure to include my favorite worn cardigan and the book I was reading. He held my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "We'll get through this," he said. "We always do." The first day, as I said, was fine. But the creeping sense of unease that began on the second day had blossomed into full-blown panic by the third. Each time the door to my room opened, my heart would leap with a painful, hopeful jolt, only to sink again when it was just a nurse or an orderly. I made excuses for him, to myself and to anyone who asked. He was busy. He wasn't well himself. Maybe his phone battery had died. The list of possibilities grew more and more desperate. The true moment of realization didn't come in a sudden flash. It was a slow, agonizing dawning. It was in the nurse's gentle but firm tone when she said, "We've tried calling him, Mrs. Parker. There's no answer." It was in the way she avoided my eyes as she adjusted my drip. It was in the hollow echo of the unanswered rings when I tried his number for the 10th time. He wasn't just busy. He wasn't just forgetful. He had left me. The thought was so monstrous, so alien that my mind couldn't fully grasp it. It was like trying to imagine the color of the sky being green. It was a violation of the natural order of my world. I lay in that bed, the beep of the monitor a mocking rhythm, and felt a coldness spread through me that had nothing to do with the linoleum floor or the draft from the window. It was the cold of absolute solitude. He had driven me to this place of fear and vulnerability, and then he had simply walked away, leaving me to face it all alone. The man who had promised to protect me had delivered me to the wolves and closed the gate behind him. On the 4th morning, the doctor came in, all smiles and efficiency. "Good news, Mrs. Parker. Your results are stable. We think you can go home today." Home. The word should have been a comfort. Instead, it was a question mark. How would I get there? What would I find when I did? A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I gripped the side of the bed. "Is my husband here?" I asked, my voice a weak whisper. The doctor's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "The nurse will help you with the discharge papers, and we can call you a taxi." Taxi. Not Richard. The finality of it hit me like a physical blow. The nurse helped me dress. My hands were shaking so much I could barely button my cardigan. She was kind, patting my arm and telling me to take my time. Every person I interacted with seemed to be walking on eggshells around me, their kindness a painful confirmation of my new, pitiable status. The old woman whose husband had abandoned her at the hospital. The taxi ride was a blur. The city I had known my whole life looked strange, unfamiliar. The driver was chatty, but I couldn't form the words to reply. I just stared out the window, my heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. I should have told him to take me straight home, but something made me ask him to drive through the town center. Maybe I was clinging to a sliver of hope, the insane thought that I'd see Richard rushing about, a perfectly logical explanation for his absence on his face. And then I saw him. He wasn't rushing. He was strolling. He was walking out of a small, expensive-looking cafe, a place we'd never once been to. And he was not alone. He was holding the door open for a woman. She was younger than me, perhaps in her late 50s, with blonde hair and a bright, stylish coat. Richard was smiling at her. It wasn't his polite, public smile. It was his real smile, the one that reached his eyes, the one I hadn't seen directed at me in a very long time. As I watched, frozen in the back of the taxi, he reached out and brushed a stray piece of hair from her face. It was a gesture of such casual, profound intimacy that it stole the air from my lungs. The world didn't just tilt. Chattered. The sound in my ears was a deafening roar. The taxi kept moving, the scene vanishing behind me, but the image was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. Him. Her. His smile. His touch. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the truth, stark and brutal and undeniable. He hadn't just left me. He had left me for someone else. I don't remember telling the taxi driver my address. I don't remember walking up the path to my own front door. The next thing I knew, I was standing in the hallway of the house we had shared for nearly 50 years. It was silent. Not the comfortable silence of a sleeping home, but the dead, empty silence of a tomb. His things were gone. Not all of them, but the important ones. The coat he always wore was missing from the hook by the door. His favorite reading glasses weren't on the side table. I walked, as if in a trance, into our bedroom. The closet was half empty. His suits, his shirts, his shoes, gone. A single stray sock lay on the floor, a pathetic remnant of a life that no longer existed. Every object in that house screamed his betrayal. The armchair where he sat to read the paper. The mug he drank his coffee from. The indentation on his side of the bed. These were not just things. They were artifacts of our shared history, and now they felt like props in a cruel play. I had been the star, and I hadn't even realized the final act had been rewritten without me. I sank onto the edge of our bed, the bed where we had slept side by side for 5 decades, and the pain hit me. It wasn't a clean wound. It was a messy, tearing, ragged agony that ripped through my soul. The shock gave way to a wave of questions, each one more painful than the last. How long? How long had this been going on right under my nose? The shorter visits, the vague excuses, the growing distance I had attributed to age and familiarity, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. I had been a fool. A blind, trusting fool. A storm of emotions raged inside me. There was heartbreak so profound it felt like my bones were dissolving. There was anger, a white-hot fury at his cowardice. To leave me was one thing. But to leave me when I was sick, frightened, and alone in a hospital, it was a cruelty I could not fathom. And beneath it all was a deep, gut-wrenching shame. How had I not known? How had I been so oblivious? I didn't cry. Not then. The pain was too big for tears. I just sat there in the deafening silence of my empty home, and felt the 52 years of my marriage crumble to dust around me. The woman who had walked out of the hospital that morning was gone. In her place was a stranger, a ghost in her own life, left to sift through the wreckage of a love she had thought was real. The first few weeks were a gray fog. I moved through the days on autopilot. Friends and family called. My children, Michael and Sarah, were horrified. They descended on the house, their faces a mixture of fury and concern. They wanted to yell at him, to confront him, to demand answers. But I told them no. What was the point? What could he possibly say that would fix what he had broken? The hardest part was the nights. The silence of the house would press in on me, and the memories would come unbidden and sharp. I would lie awake in our bed, the empty space beside me a cold, vast expanse. For the first time in my adult life I was truly alone. The change didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, painful crawl back into the light. It started with the smallest of things. One morning I woke up and instead of lying there waiting for the dread to set in, I got up and made myself a pot of tea. I sat by the window in the kitchen and drank it, watching the sun rise. It was a small act of self-preservation, but it felt like a victory. A few days later I went out into the garden. It was neglected, the roses unpruned, the weeds taking over. Richard had always handled the heavy work. Looking at the mess, I felt a surge of despair. But then a different feeling took its place. Determination. I found the old gardening gloves and a pair of shears, and I started with one rose bush. I snipped away the dead branches, my hands aching, my back protesting. But with every cut I felt like I was clearing away a piece of the decay inside me. I started walking. At first just to the end of the street and back. Then around the block. Then to the park. I reconnected with old friends, women I had lost touch with over the years as my world had shrunk to revolve around Richard. We had coffee. We talked. I didn't have to pretend with them. They had seen it all. They let me cry. They let me be angry. And they reminded me of the woman I had been before I was just Richard's wife. I was rediscovering myself, piece by piece. I found I enjoyed cooking for one, trying new recipes without having to worry if he would like them. I joined a book club. I started painting again, a hobby I had given up when the children were small. My canvases were filled with bright, bold colors, a stark contrast to the grayness I had been living in. I was not seeking revenge. I was not trying to show him what he had lost. I was simply, quietly and determinately choosing to live. Time is a strange thing. It doesn't heal all wounds, not really. The scar of Richard's betrayal will always be a part of me. But time does soften the edges. It smooths them down until they are no longer sharp enough to cut you every time you move. It's been 5 years now since that day. I sold the house. It was too full of ghosts. I moved into a small, bright apartment with a balcony where I can keep my potted roses. It's all mine. Every book on the shelf, every picture on the wall, is something I chose. I did see him one more time about a year after I left. I was in the grocery store reaching for a carton of milk when I heard a voice behind me. Gracie. I turned and there he was. He looked older. The confident smile I had seen that day outside the cafe was gone. He looked tired. The woman, his new wife, was with him. She looked at me with an awkward, apologetic expression. Richard started to speak, his voice stammering. I'm sorry. I looked at him, at this man who had been the center of my universe for so long, and I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The heartbreak was a dull, distant ache. I just saw a sad, weak man who had made a terrible choice. I didn't need his apology. I had already found my own peace. I hope you're happy, Richard, I said, and my voice was steady. And I meant it. His happiness was no longer my responsibility, just as my happiness was no longer his to take. I turned, put the milk in my cart, and walked away. I did not look back. Finding peace wasn't about forgiving him. It was about forgiving myself. Forgiving myself for not seeing it, for trusting so blindly. It was about accepting that the life I had planned was not the life I was going to get, and that was okay. Peace came when I stopped looking backward at the door he had closed and started looking forward at the path I was creating for myself. It's a quieter path, perhaps, but it is solid ground beneath my feet. And for the first time in a very long time, I am not afraid of falling. So here I am, 75 years old. I have lived a life I never expected. I have known the highest joys of love and the deepest canyons of betrayal. And I am still here. If you are watching this and you have known a pain like mine, my heart is with you. I want you to hear me. The end of a great love feels like the end of the world. Feels like your own story is over. But it is not. You are not just a chapter in someone else's book. You are the author of your own. The pain you feel is real. Honor it. Let yourself grieve for what you have lost. But do not build a house in that grief. Do not let bitterness take root in your soul. It is a poison that will only harm you. You will feel weak. You will feel lost. But somewhere inside you, there is a strength you do not yet know you possess. Find it. It may be as small as a single rose bush, as quiet as a cup of tea made just for you. Nurture it. Let it grow. The journey back to yourself is taken one small, brave step at a time. I lost my husband, but I found myself. And that is a trait I would not undo. The love I have for myself now is a quiet, steady flame that no one can ever extinguish. It is a love born from resilience, from survival, from the ashes of a life that burned to the ground. Remember this, my dears. Betrayal breaks the heart, but healing comes when you choose yourself. I found peace the moment I let go of the story of us and started writing the story of me. And it is a beautiful story. Thank you for letting me share it with you.